In the crowded aisles of an Ohio grocery store, a black mechanic faced a vicious, racist attack from an entitled shopper, but her fearless comeback didn't just silence the room, it sparked a revolution of respect that no one saw coming. The fluorescent lights of Carter's Market buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the aisles of canned goods and fresh produce. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in a small Ohio town, the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other and the air carried the faint scent of baked bread from the bakery next door. Shoppers moved through the store with purpose, their carts squeaking against the polished linoleum floor, some chatting about weekend plans, others lost in their grocery lists. Among them was Jasmine Carter, a 32-year-old mechanic whose calloused hands still bore the faint smudge of motor oil from a long morning at the garage. She wore a faded gray hoodie and jeans, her slender frame slightly hunched from fatigue after fixing a stubborn transmission that had kept her up past mid. Jasmine just wanted to grab a few things for dinner, some chicken, potatoes, and a bag of apples for her mom, who'd been craving apple pie all week. She adjusted the straps of her worn backpack, her mind drifting to the quiet evening she hoped to have, maybe even catching the tail end of the football game on TV. As Jasmine reached for a bag of apples in the produce section, a sharp voice cut through the hum of the store like a blade. "Hey, you!" The voice was loud, commanding, and dripping with disdain. Jasmine turned, her hand still hovering over the apples, to see a middle-aged woman in her late 50s standing a few feet away. She wore an expensive cream-colored coat, her blonde hair neatly styled, and her face was flushed with an anger that seemed to come out of nowhere. Her name was Evelyn Harper, a local real estate agent known for her sharp tongue and even sharper sense of entitlement. She clutched her designer purse tightly, her manicured nails digging into the leather as she glared at Jasmine. "You don't belong here," she snapped, her voice loud enough to make a nearby shopper drop a jar of pickles, the glass shattering on the floor with a sharp crack. The sound drew more eyes, and the air in the store seemed to shift, growing heavy with tension. Jasmine froze, her heart sinking as the familiar sting of prejudice washed over her. She'd heard comments like this before, whispers at the garage, sneers at gas stations, but never so publicly, so brazenly. Her fingers tightened around the bag of apples, the plastic crinkling under her grip as she tried to process what was happening. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice calm but laced with confusion, hoping she'd misheard her. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor, her expression a mix of disgust and superiority. "I said, you don't belong here," she repeated, her tone venomous. "Why don't you go back to where you came from? We don't need your kind taking over our town." The words hit Jasmine like a punch, each syllable a reminder of the battles she'd fought to be seen as more than a stereotype, to be seen as a woman who worked hard, paid her bills, and cared for her family. The store fell silent, the hum of conversation replaced by an awkward stillness that pressed down on everyone within earshot. A young mother near the bread aisle pulled her son closer, her eyes wide with unease as she whispered something to him. An older man stacking cans of soup paused, his hands trembling slightly as he glanced at Jasmine, his face a mix of sympathy and fear. Jasmine's chest tightened, the weight of Evelyn's words threatening to crush her, but she refused to let her see her break. She thought of her mom, who'd raised her alone after her dad passed, working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. She'd always told her, "Hold your head high, Jasmine, you're worth more than their words." That memory was a lifeline, a spark of strength that kept her grounded in the face of Evelyn's hatred. Evelyn's words echoed through the aisles, each one a dagger that deepened the wound she'd inflicted. Jasmine's jaw tightened, her grip on the bag of apples loosening as she set it back on the display, her movements deliberate, as if she were trying to hold herself together. She wanted to walk away, to escape the burning stares of the crowd. But Evelyn wasn't done. She took another step closer, her voice rising, sharp and unyielding. "I know your type," she sneered, her lips curling into a grimace. "You come here, take our jobs, make our streets unsafe. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm sick of people like you thinking you can just waltz in and take over." Her accusations were baseless, but they carried the weight of years of unchecked prejudice, a venom that poisoned the air around them. The crowd's unease grew, their murmurs a low hum that buzzed like a swarm of bees. A teenage cashier named Sarah, barely 19 with freckles dotting her cheeks, watched from her station, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. She'd seen Jasmine in the store before, always polite, always tipping her a shy smile as she paid for her groceries. She wanted to say something, to defend her, but fear kept her rooted in place. Fear of Evelyn. Fear of losing her job. Across the aisle, a middle-aged truck driver named Tom, his flannel shirt stained with coffee, shifted uncomfortably, his own memories of prejudice stirring within him. He'd grown up in a town much like this one, had seen his father turned away from jobs because of his accent, and the pain of those moments had never left him. He muttered under his breath, "This ain't right." His voice low but firm, a small spark of resistance in the face of Evelyn's tirade. Jasmine's heart pounded, a mix of hurt and anger swirling in her chest like a storm. She thought of the long hours she'd spent at the garage, fixing cars for people in this very town. People who thanked her with smiles and handshakes. She'd rebuilt Evelyn's neighbor's sedan just last month, staying late to make sure the single mom could get to work the next day. All of that, erased by a woman who didn't even know her name. She opened her mouth to respond, but Evelyn cut her off, her voice a venomous hiss. "Don't even try to talk back to me," she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I've got half a mind to call the manager and have you thrown out." The threat was a slap, a public humiliation that made Jasmine's blood boil, but she refused to let her see her falter. Just then, a small act of kindness broke through the tension like a ray of sunlight. A young boy, no older than 6, who'd been watching from his mother's side, tugged free of her hand and toddled over to Jasmine. He held out a small candy bar from his pocket, his voice soft but clear. "Here, miss," he said, his innocent gesture a stark contrast to Evelyn's hatred. The boy's mother gasped, rushing to pull him back, but the damage was done. Evelyn's face flushed with embarrassment, her tirade momentarily derailed by the child's unexpected kindness. Jasmine smiled faintly at the boy, her heart lifting just enough to keep her from breaking. A glimmer of hope in the darkness of the moment. Evelyn's face twisted with irritation at the boy's interruption, but she quickly regained her composure, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that echoed through the store. "See what I mean?" she barked, turning to the crowd for support, her arms flailing dramatically. "Even kids know something's wrong here. We don't need people like her in our town." Her words were a desperate attempt to rally the crowd, but they fell flat, the murmurs around her growing quieter, more uneasy. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the shame of being publicly humiliated a bitter pill she refused to swallow. She thought of her mom again, her voice echoing in her mind. "You're worth more than their words." That memory fueled a fire within her, a resolve that burned brighter than her anger. She couldn't let Evelyn's ignorance define her, couldn't let her words erase the years she'd spent building a life in this town. The tension in the store crackled like a storm about to break, every shopper holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Sarah, the cashier, finally found her courage, her voice trembling but firm as she spoke up from her station. "She's a regular here," she said, her cheeks flushed with nervousness. "She's always been kind to me. She doesn't deserve this." Her words were a quiet rebellion, a small act of defiance that carried the weight of her own pain. She'd been bullied as a kid for her freckles, and seeing Jasmine face the same hatred stirred a protective instinct within her. Evelyn turned to Sarah, her expression darkening, but before she could snap back, Tom the truck driver stepped forward, his broad frame a quiet threat. "Lady, you need to stop," he said, his voice low but steady, his own memories of injustice fueling his anger. "You don't know this woman, and you've got no right to talk to her like that." Jasmine seized the lifeline Sarah and Tom had thrown her, her resolve hardening like steel. She straightened her posture, her presence growing larger in the silence, her voice rising with a strength that silenced the murmurs. "I don't need to prove myself to you," she said, her tone unyielding, each word a declaration of her worth. Her gaze locked onto Evelyn's, a fire burning within her that made her take a half step back, her heels scraping against the linoleum. The crowd's energy shifted, a ripple of hope spreading through the store like a wave, a beacon in the darkness of the moment. Evelyn's confidence faltered, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse, her bravado cracking under the weight of Jasmine's defiance and the crowd's growing disapproval. The stage was set for a reckoning, a moment where the tide began to turn in Jasmine's favor. Evelyn's lips tightened, her pride wounded by Jasmine's defiance and the crowd's shifting allegiance. She lunged forward, her hand reaching for her arm as if to drag her out herself, her voice a shrill screech. "I'll have you thrown out of here myself!" Her movement was clumsy, fueled by desperation, her breath hot with anger, her expression wild with a mix of rage and entitlement. She wanted to reassert her dominance, to prove to the crowd and to herself that she wasn't shaken by Jasmine's words or the others' interference. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Years of working in high-pressure environments at the garage had honed her instincts, had taught her to stay calm in the face of chaos, to act quickly when the stakes were high. She'd once pulled a coworker out of harm's way when a car slipped off a jack, her reflexes sharp and unyielding. Evelyn was nothing compared to that. With a swift, precise motion, Jasmine sidestepped her grab, catching her wrist mid-air, her grip firm but not harsh. In one fluid movement, she guided her hand back to her side, using her momentum to keep her at a distance, her movements controlled and deliberate. The store erupted in gasps, the sound a collective release of the tension that had been building since Evelyn first approached her. Evelyn let out a startled yelp, her bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun, her designer purse slipping from her shoulder and thudding to the floor. Jasmine leaned in, her voice low and controlled, each word carrying the weight of every car she'd fixed, every customer she'd helped. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere," she said, her tone a thunderclap that reverberated through the room, silencing every whisper, every breath. Jasmine stepped back, her gaze never wavering, her presence commanding the room like a beacon in the storm. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," she said, her voice steady but laced with quiet fury. "I've been fixing cars in this town for years, maybe even yours. But let me tell you something you don't know." She paused, letting the silence stretch, the crowd hanging on her every word. "Last summer I was on my way home from the garage when I saw a car broken down on Route 52. A woman was stranded, her kid crying in the back seat. I stopped, fixed her tire, and got her back on the road. That woman was your sister, Evelyn. She told me her name. Margaret Harper. She said her sister lived in this town, drove a fancy white SUV. I didn't think much of it then, but now I know who she was talking about." The twist landed hard, a revelation that struck Evelyn like a physical blow. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process her words, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. She remembered that day. Margaret had called her, gushing about the kind mechanic who'd saved her, how she'd been terrified until she showed up. That mechanic had been Jasmine. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a wave of murmurs swelling into a chorus of awe. Sarah, the cashier, let out a soft gasp, her hands covering her mouth as she realized the depth of Jasmine's impact. Tom, the truck driver, nodded slowly, his respect for Jasmine deepening with every word. Evelyn's hands trembled as she bent to pick up her purse, her earlier confidence shattered, her world tilting on its axis as she understood the depth of her mistake. Jasmine's identity as a mechanic was no longer in question. It was a force she hadn't seen coming, a power that shifted the balance of the room in an instant. Evelyn stumbled back, her hands clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white, the weight of Jasmine's revelation pressing down on her like a ton of bricks. Her earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by a stunned silence that hung heavy in the air, as if the truth of her sister's story had stripped her of her voice. She struggled to process the reality of her situation, her mind racing with the image of Jasmine fixing Margaret's tire, her hands steady and sure, her kindness a lifeline on a dark road. The weight of her mistake was a bitter pill, each breath a reminder of the harm she'd caused. Her gaze darted between Jasmine and the crowd, the murmurs of the shoppers a constant stinging reminder of the scene she'd created. their whispers a chorus of judgment she couldn't escape. Jasmine turned to her, her expression softening just enough to offer a chance at redemption, but her posture remained firm, unyielding. Her voice was steady, laced with the authority she'd earned through years of hard work, a tone that carried the weight of her resilience. "I'm giving you a choice, Evelyn," she said, her words echoing through the store with a quiet power that silenced the murmurs. "Acknowledge what you did and walk away, or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you are." Her statement was a challenge, a call for accountability that left no room for excuses, a mirror held up to Evelyn's actions that she couldn't look away from. Inside, Jasmine felt a surge of pride, a fire that burned brighter than ever, fueled by the knowledge that she'd not only defended herself, but also honored the countless customers who trusted her with their cars, their livelihoods, their safety. Evelyn hesitated, her pride warring with the reality of her situation, a battle that played out in the tense set of her jaw and the flicker of shame in her expression. Her mind flashed to Margaret, her sister's voice on the phone that day, filled with gratitude for the mechanic who'd saved her. Evelyn had dismissed it then, too wrapped up in her own world to care, but now that gratitude was a knife, cutting through her defenses with brutal clarity. She saw the depth of her error, the harm she'd caused, not just to Jasmine but to the memory of her sister's relief, a memory she'd tainted with her own prejudice. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her as she nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. Her voice was low and shaky, a jagged whisper that carried the weight of her shame. I was wrong," she admitted, the confession tearing at her pride like a blade. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Jasmine nodded in acknowledgement, her heart feeling lighter as she absorbed her words, the apology a small but significant step toward healing the wound she'd inflicted. The tension in her shoulders eased, a quiet relief washing over her like a gentle wave, soothing the raw edges of her earlier anger. It mingled with the pride that still burned within her, a fire now tempered by a sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that she'd turned a moment of hatred into one of reckoning. She turned to the crowd, her presence commanding as she spoke, each word a testament to her resilience. "I'm a mechanic. I fix things, cars, problems, sometimes even people's days. And I'll keep doing it, no matter what anyone thinks of me." The store erupted into applause, the sound a symphony of support that filled the space, a collective acknowledgement of her courage. Tom stepped forward, offering Jasmine a firm handshake, his rough hand a symbol of the respect he now held for her. Sarah, wiping a tear from her cheek, gave Jasmine a small nod, her hands trembling with admiration as she mouthed, "Thank you." She then walked over, placing a small discount coupon on her basket, a quiet gesture of gratitude for the courage she'd witnessed. From the perspective of the young mother who'd been watching with her son, Jasmine's words were a revelation, a lesson in strength she'd never forget. She'd watched the entire scene unfold, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and awe, her son's small hand clutching hers as he'd offered Jasmine the candy bar. Now, as she saw Jasmine stand tall, her faded hoodie a symbol of her unwavering dedication, she felt a spark of inspiration ignite within her. She turned to her son, her voice soft, but filled with determination. "That's what a real hero looks like." Her son nodded, his eyes wide with wonder, a silent promise that he'd remember this moment for the rest of his life. Evelyn shuffled out quietly, her head bowed, her earlier arrogance replaced by a humbled silence, leaving Jasmine to finish her shopping in peace. The apples and chicken now a quiet victory she savored with every step. 2 years later, Carter's Market had transformed into a symbol of change in the small Ohio town. Its once sterile aisles now a testament to the power of courage and kindness. The walls were adorned with a framed photo of Jasmine, a gift from the community, honoring the day she'd stood up to prejudice and sparked a movement. The store had started a weekly Community Heroes Day, inviting mechanics, teachers, and other unsung heroes to share their stories, their voices filling the space with tales of resilience and hope. Jasmine's actions had ignited a shift, ensuring that no one would be judged by their appearance again, a legacy that rippled through the town like a wave. Her gaze softened with emotion as she traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip, the cool metal a grounding contrast to the warmth in her chest. the memory of that day stirring a quiet pride that had only grown with time. She thought of her mom, who'd cried tears of joy when she'd told her the story, her voice trembling as she'd said, "I always knew you'd make me proud." That promise to make her proud had led her here, to a legacy she'd never imagined, a beacon of hope for a community that had once turned a blind eye to injustice. Jasmine, now a respected advocate for workplace equity, worked closely with Sarah, who'd become a community organizer for Community Heroes Day, her once timid demeanor replaced by a quiet confidence that shone through in every action. Sarah's guilt from that day had fueled her passion, a fire that had burned away her fear and ignited a new purpose. Her voice was steady as she welcomed guests, her hands no longer trembling as she handed out flyers, the paper crisp and bright with the promise of change. She'd even started a small fund during Community Heroes Day, collecting donations to support local vocational students, a tangible act of kindness inspired by Jasmine's courage. Tom, the truck driver, had become a regular volunteer, his own experiences with prejudice driving his commitment, a dedication that had softened the edges of his gruff exterior. He pitched ideas for outreach, his voice steady as he suggested ways to expand Community Heroes Day, his hands, once clenched in anger, now holding posters for the next event, their edges slightly crumpled from his eager grip. Tom had also taken to mentoring young volunteers at the events, sharing stories of his own journey to teach them the value of standing up against injustice. A quiet act of giving back that honored. At a regional equity conference, Jasmine stood on stage, her hoodie replaced by a sharp blazer that spoke of her new role, a symbol of the authority she'd earned through her tireless advocacy. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd, her presence commanding, a fire burning within her that had only grown brighter with time. "Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right," she declared, her tone resolute, each word carrying the weight of her journey, a call to action that resonated through the room. Sarah watched from the audience, her heart swelling with pride, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she listened to the woman who'd changed her life. The woman who'd once feared speaking out was now a champion for change, her own journey a testament to the ripple effect of Jasmine's courage, a legacy that had inspired her to find her own voice. The applause was a symphony of hope that filled the room, a sound that carried the promise of a better future, a future where kindness and courage could overcome any divide. From the perspective of the young volunteers who filled the conference hall, Jasmine was a hero, a shining example that courage and kindness could overcome any bias. Their applause reverberated beyond the room, a wave of inspiration that touched each of them in its own way. One young volunteer, a Latina woman in her early 20s, felt a deep connection to Jasmine's story, her own experiences with prejudice flashing through her mind like a reel of painful memory. She remembered a customer who'd refused her service at a diner, sneering, "I don't trust people like you with my food," the words a dagger that had pierced her confidence. But Jasmine's words gave her strength, a reminder that her worth wasn't defined by others' biases. Her pen paused over her notebook, her hand trembling slightly as she whispered to a colleague, "She's why I'll keep fighting." Her resolve mirrored Jasmine's own, a fire that would shape the future of her community in ways she couldn't yet foresee, a legacy that would live on through every life she touched. Jasmine's story reached beyond the conference hall, touching the hearts of those who heard it, a story of justice that could heal the deepest divides. Dear viewer, her journey reminds us of the power we hold to make a difference, the power to turn bias into a moment of strength. Have you ever faced prejudice and transformed it into a moment of triumph? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear your victories just like Jasmine's, stories that remind us of the resilience we all carry within us. If this story touched you, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more tales of justice and kindness. Stories that inspire us to build a world where respect isn't a dream, but a reality. Change begins with you, with every heart we lift, with every step we take toward a better tomorrow, a tomorrow where courage and kindness reign.